My screen now?
Yes, you should have screen sharing. I think I turned that on.
All right, let's see what happens. Okay, that look, you guys can see that?
Not yet, Julie.
Not yet. Can you now?
There we go. That looks
Oh,
good.
this is good. Oh, this is good because I'm happy because I can actually
I just want to wait for us.
Julie, we lost her somehow.
We lost Julie.
Julie?
And I couldn't find Julie.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
It's coming back on now.
This is a little bit of a joke. Since I didn't prepare, Julie just is going to hand it over to me. Tonight's. Oh, Julie, you're back.
no,
All right,
I'm
thanks.
sorry. I did, yeah, I got a little messed up there. Sorry. Okay, we'll go back to the screen sharing. Okay, let me get my. Okay, that's the one. Can you guys see the PowerPoint?
Not yet,
Not
Julie.
yet.
Oh, that's you have to double share in this world.
Okay.
There you
There
go.
you go.
You're good, Julie.
Great. All right, I'm going to try to make it so I can see you guys, all of you, so I can know if you're wanting to talk, because that's what we're hoping for. All right. So as you know, we're doing a series called Loving God with All Your Soul, and we're using Sky Jethani's book called Reimagining the Way You Relate to God. 2 weeks ago, Kristen led our class, and we've been looking at the prepositions that describe our relationship to God. Kristen talked about over and under, and these few chapters really are about like what not to do. So that's always fun to teach. I used to have a friend. There's a lot of lessons you can learn all the time. Some of them are what not to do. But the prepositions that I'll be looking at are life from God and life for God. So for chapter 4 is life from God, and I got these great little slides from Kristen, and with the little the vertical words and stuff. And this is the little stick figure that describes God as in this triangle. These stick figures are us, and we're getting life from God. But these are the views, and these are kind of the what not to do views about life from God, because I think if we just hear the word life from God, I don't think we think of that as being totally wrong. So we're going to look at these views. One of them is God exists to help us through our problems and achieve what we want. God's role is to supply what we need or desire. It's fueled by a consumer culture. And God's value is determined by his usefulness. So again, like as I said before, this idea that everything about life from God is not a good way of looking at God. We do want to talk about what's right about this posture or this preposition or this relationship with God. Scripture reminds us that all we have comes from God. Jesus calls us to ask God for what we need. If anyone is able to help us, it's God. But life from God overemphasizes this single aspect of the divine human relationship. So we're going to look at the first element of life for God, which the view that we said characterizes this posture is God's role is to supply what we need or desire. And this is a quote from the book. I've changed it slightly, but it's God is a holy vending machine who dispenses the wares, wisdom, and outcomes. I added outcomes because I think that we wouldn't, again, I think it's important to think of it when we just ask God for everything. We feel like our relationship is we ask, he gives. We ask, he gives. And sometimes it's not simply wares. It's not all just a bike, a car, a house. Sometimes it is wisdom and outcomes. So how might we see this playing out in our prayer lives? I'm just going to start that by saying that I often go to God with a list, saying, and some of the things aren't bad things, but can be a posture that is very familiar to me. Going to God with your list of the things that you want. It could be the healing of a sick child. It could be all the things we've talked about tonight. So those are some things that happened to me. How do you guys feel about that? Do you have a similar thought? Anybody?
Julie, I like that you added the word outcomes, because I again often pray for outcomes, and it's a bit one-sided, if that's what you're trying to say.
Julie, I'm not sure you can see us very well to see that we're waiting.
Yeah, I can.
And okay. Yeah, there's been times in my life I felt like I had a worry list, and my prayers just really was regurgitating that worry list. I'm concerned about this, I'm concerned about that, and it felt like there was something missing when that was what it was.
And so the next question that I have here is, does it matter what we pray for? I do think of Jesus asking us, it's just saying in the Sermon on the Mount, ask and you will receive, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be opened. But it's kind of at the end of the Sermon on the Mount when he's saying, blessed is the poor in spirit, blessed are the meek, blessed are the merciful. And so he's kind of giving you a clue into what you should be asking about. But, is that the exclusive list? So what do we think about this? And I think we want to recognize that, this posture is not completely wrong, but it's the overemphasis. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of our culture concerns and issues, but does it matter what we pray for? John?
I feel like there's some hints. I'm a dad of sort of grown young men, and I tell them, you can ask me anything, okay? And my desire is for you to have, a fulfilling life, a good life, and I want to help you. And the interesting thing is my children ask me for almost nothing. But I give them a lot, again, out of that desire. And if they ask me, I wouldn't mind them asking, but I would not want them to view me as a cash register, cash register.
Well, it's interesting. It sounds as though they don't, even though you have made yourself pretty available.
Yeah. But because I feel that's my role as a father, and maybe that's God's role as a father. Maybe he feels the same way.
Well, the next question here is, what's the downside of this approach to God? And I think, Debbie, you hit on it, that, there's sometimes when it feels a little one-sided. And I've felt that in my life too, even though, it composes a lot of my prayer life, is asking for things, a lot of time. I mean, I think about how often I tell someone I'm going to pray for you, and I want to do that when I say that. So, that's a list that'll be on the list. But, I think that there's a time when you feel like, I'm not really talking to God. I'm just asking, I'm just talking at him, kind of. I'm not really benefiting in a relational way with this list. Other things that come to mind in terms of a downside.
I think when we just come to God with our lists, we just are so short-sighted, and we're really cheating ourselves of a richer existence, from God. that it's not about all these things that we want, or maybe these things that we want are really more about the relationship, the hope, the contentment
Mm.
that that can come from just being content with whatever life throws at us.
Yeah, you definitely don't get that from this posture. We'll see a little bit more about that, but anything about how we can go ahead. I'm sorry. So somebody.
I was just going to say that it's also, it's not emphasizing any listening in terms of, hearing God's will. It's just talking at, and ignoring the silence and the listening.
Yeah, appreciate that. That's a good point. So, I mean, I think some of the ways that we can balance this have really been what we've said as a downside to it. I think, as Kelly related, we want to, to recognize that we want what we have. We've talked a little bit about that in Ecclesiastes and so forth. And just, we want to listen to God. I think Kristen made a good point there. Looking at this, the role of consumerism, Jethani spends quite a bit of time talking about consumerism. I'm going to read some of the quotes from the book. The advent of mass production during the Industrial Revolution created previously unimaginable quantities of goods, far more than the market needed. Manufacturers suddenly required a way to artificially increase demand for their products to keep the economy steaming along. And this is a long time ago, but in 1955, an economist said, our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption our way of life, that we convert the buying and use of goods into rituals, that we seek our spiritual satisfaction, our ego satisfaction in consumption. Although lack of self-control has always plagued humanity, for the first time in history, an economic system has been created that relies on it. If people began suppressing their desires and consuming only what they needed, our economy would collapse. To prevent this, satisfying personal desires has become sacrosanct. And finally, commodified goods and experiences are used to keep us amused, anesthetizing us from the unpleasant realities of our existence. Neil Portman explained this phenomenon at length in his influential book, Amusing Ourselves to Death. Amusement, he reminds us, literally means to not think. In other words, to be distracted, filling our lives with trivial possessions and experiences in an attempt to distract us from fears and pains of life. So that's quite a mouthful. This is a little graphic. I was, trying to, this idea of materialism being the consumption of things to make us feel good or happy. So, how do we see this playing out in our lives? Do you find yourself looking for satisfaction from consumables? And I like this also, the experiences. I think that fits in.
Is that a question, Julie?
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Question
fair
mark?
enough. Only because, I spent a little time before class just trying to figure out, for us, where to go for vacation. So it's an experience that I was seeking and looking for. So I'm at fault of that.
Yeah, I think it's, I think I mean, I see myself doing pretty much a lot, buying something or consuming something really for my own satisfaction. So maybe this is too obvious to a question. Do you see the way that culture influences satisfying personal desires as sacrosanct? And sacrosanct, in this, context is I had a good definition. I'm just going to look for it here. Regarded as too important or valuable to be interfered with.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I have felt like consumerism and the way it's affected me, I think about, the fact that I can get anything I want. If it's a can opener, a dress, or, eyeliner. in a day and I don't have to leave.
Right.
And so everything that you could possibly desire, you know, you don't even have to wait for, and you don't have to even make a lot of effort to get it. So there is something about the way that that's influenced my view on getting what I need. It should be easy and it should be fast. Anybody else have a thought around that question?
I feel like
No.
there's so many commercials that use the phrase, "you deserve this."
Mm.
And I always think it, I'm always like, well, you just made this commercial for millions of people, or this large audience. How is it possible that every one of us deserves whatever it is? And on what basis do I deserve, this mattress or something? But I feel like that language definitely is an aspect of where the culture influences that, we all deserve whatever we could possibly imagine. We deserve it. On the basis of what, I'm not sure, but
Yeah, no, that's a very good insight.
And it even goes beyond just consumables. We're told that we deserve to be happy. We're told that that we can have it all, that we can have the family and the job and the vacation house. We can have it all, and we shouldn't have to make sacrifices. And that in relationships too, there's this, you get rid of the person in your life that's causing you any trouble, which for me kind of goes against, what we believe as Christians.
Sure. So how do we keep from viewing everything's value by its usefulness to me? I mean, this may be, again, one of those questions that's not easy to answer because because we know that this is just not a value as a Christian that we, ascribe to. Doesn't mean we don't do it. It just means that, that we've been taught that we don't want to value everything by its usefulness to me. Anybody else have any thoughts around that question? So how might this affect our relationship with God, the role of consumerism? And I think, anybody have a thought around that?
Julie, the thought that word keeps popping in my mind is deprivation. And I think that we generally, we overuse that. But it's interesting that I think with during the pandemic, when we couldn't do things, we couldn't enjoy things, we did believe that we were deprived. And basically all we had to do was pivot and find something different to enjoy. And we could do that. And in contrast, when you think of, people who are immigrants, people of Ukraine now, or immigrants that come to this country, they have really experienced deprivation. And they can't pivot to something different. But it's kind of like we use, I think of deprivation as the opposite of what we've been talking about. And we're so easily I think we too easily feel deprived of something, like somebody commented on, that we deserve, as if we deserve the thing that we use such strong words.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one way, and I appreciate that, is that we don't feel content. That's how that is one way this might affect our relationship with God too, is we feel discontent. All right, just to move on here. So, this is going to be similar to what Kristen taught about, but why life God posture doesn't work. It basically, the question, and we asked this about the under and the over prepositions too, was how does this posture deal with pain and fear and pain, and especially with regard to the influence of consumerism that keeps us distracted and numb. I mean, and I think that, that's a reality. Many of us, when we do feel pain, we look to what can we buy, what can we consume, what can we do differently? What can we experience to just numb and distract? It offers no redemptive explanation for the existence of pain and suffering. And I think this was also in the other, I'll say, prepositional relationships with God. So I think this is an interesting question. How does consumerism as a cultural value creep into our faith traditions? And Jethani offers a couple of things here. He says, we seek worship experiences that soothe our struggles. We seek entertainment and amusement from our worship experiences. And, one of the things that this does is it takes us into worship as takers, as ones expecting to receive. And, that can be harmful because then we're not prepared to give. And if we don't receive what we want, we think, I got to go another place. So any thoughts around this, how consumerism as a cultural value, how does it creep into our faith traditions? Any other thoughts around that?
Julie, I was kind of caught, I don't know if it answers this question particularly, but I was caught up in the thought about using things to entertain or abuse us. And from my background, the way I'm kind of built, I tend to be serious and, never been a partier. So there's a piece of me that's kind of that almost Puritan-like capacity, and like to actually go out and have a good time and enjoy oneself is almost like, ooh, can I do that? Is it still okay? The Christian. So sometimes there's this tension between, and what I'm hearing there is kind of like almost saying, no, don't go out there and have a good time. God doesn't really want you to enjoy your life. So there's some balance to be found there between God's gift of relationships and joy with other people and enjoying the world around us, and yet at the same time having that sense of responsibility and care for others. So there's balancing.
Yeah. No, and Debbie, that's a very good point. Meaning this, this posture and the things that, he's saying here, they're worth listening to and trying to apply, but it's not a be all. And, I think that's the other problem with looking at what not to do. It doesn't help you to see the good in something. So when Chris comes and he gets to do the what to do, it's going to be in good shape. Okay, so we want to look at this other posture called life for God. And again, you can see a little stick figure, and this is somebody kind of putting their lives into God. And it's characterized by the following views, and it'll be, kind of obvious why this could be a problem. What matters most is not God's love for me, but how much I accomplish for him. God's mission is more important than God himself. God's mission defines everything and everyone. An individual is either on mission, the object of mission, an obstacle to the mission, an aid to the mission, or one who should be on mission. And we're going to talk a little in more detail about these things. But again, I just want to emphasize that what's right about this posture, this idea of living the life for God, I think that most of us would say that's not a terrible thing to do. But you can see that the overemphasis or the problems associated with doing that with, outside of God, not with God. But what's right about this is Jesus calls us to deny ourselves and take up our cross and follow him. So he certainly is wanting us to live our lives for him. That's not outside of his desire for us. He calls his disciples to go and make disciples of all nations. Paul's life was a testament to how Jesus had called him to be a chosen instrument to proclaim his name to the Gentiles, their kings, and to the people of Israel. This is a quote from actually Acts 9:15. Again, the life for God overemphasizes the single aspect of the divine human relationship. So, this idea here, what matters most is not God's love for me, but how much I accomplish for him. Just want to kind of get to see my notes here. So, what harm can come to those who believe this? I'm going to start by a couple of answers and, want you guys to see if you agree, disagree, or want to add to this. When accomplishments are lower than expectations, God may seem distant and discouragement can set in. When much is accomplished, the focus can turn from God to human effort. People are praised rather than God. Human metrics are applied to measure success versus God's metrics. And we'll, yeah, so this is some of the harm that can come, and it just curiosity, and I'll ask this the next question, but does anybody relate to this, this life for God and some of the pitfalls?
Maybe we spend too much time, looking for things that will, satisfy us and not having enough time, to worship God.
Mm.
Well, that's not the way it should be. God made us. God is our boss. So we, in a way, we're working for God. So we shouldn't be distracted with, whatever we're chasing, to make a living, because God gave us the living in the first place. God made everything available. Whatever we're chasing, God makes it available. We should remember that and not forget that He provided whatever it is that we're chasing.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I again, with this idea of trying to accomplish for God, and that what matters most is what I do for Him, in this. And one of the things that strikes me is this idea about human metrics and God's metrics. I think, just being, even being on the board of Hope Raised Children, there's a lot of times where we're saying, well, the metric should be this. You should have, 5 well-adjusted, successful Haitians after they've been educated. And you're like, really? What exactly makes you think that that can be possible? Necessarily. I'm not saying that the metrics aren't a good thing, but when you're doing God's work, you can't exactly define the metrics. God doesn't always work that way. So I don't know what you guys think about all that.
This is Kathy. Yeah, it's also when you start down this road, which I think, well, I can only speak for myself, but I have fallen into this at times, where it's never enough. You think you're doing everything, and then you try to do a little more and a little more or whatever, and you get into this thing that it's just because you're doing it for God. God's infinite. It's never enough. It's never enough. You could always, and then you can get kind of crazy that any of these things that you just focus on to the exclusion, either way, it seems like, that's how you get kind of crazy on these things, and you realize each of these has their faults or their follies or the way, you have to come back from some of these. Some of them you don't realize it till you get down, or you see it in somebody else and you think, oh, this is not working. It's just not the right measurement. I think you're right on the measurement thing too. It's like, how in the world do you measure it? How do I know if it's enough? That God wants everything, my whole being, my whole everything. And whoops, my timer's going off. Alexa, stop the timer. Too many things going on at once.
Well, thank you. I mean, and this is, my next question was going to be, can you relate to this? And how has this posture helped or hurt you in accomplishing God's mission? And Kathy, like you, I can relate to this. And I do want to just make this statement. This posture can appear or feel like great passion for God's mission. This exact statement, what matters most is not what God's love for me, but how much I accomplish for Him. When you see that in a person, it can look like great passion. And, but burnout, depression, and not experiencing God loves are possible / inevitable. Because if you aren't really focused on what matters most is God's love for me, the chances are you are going to get burned out, depressed, and you won't experience God's love because you're not really seeking it. So I don't know.
Or Julie, we may, because this is my thing too. somewhere in here, are we motivated to do the things we do because we don't feel we're worthy of God's love, and we're trying to earn God's love? And I think that's a pretty important detail.
Yeah, I would agree, John. That is a way of trying to not, not look at me, trying to find God's love for you by accomplishing things for him that's not foreign.
I feel like it's also something that can be one of the things that turns people off from religious institutions, because I feel like it's this in some organized religions' efforts to have people behave well, it turns into this manipulative, what are you doing in response to this? So we talk about these other postures where we're sort of manipulating the relationship with God. This also feels like sometimes it's being manipulated by religious leaders to kind of, get the best behavior out of their people.
Yeah, I think it's good. That's a really good point, Kristen. And actually one of the things that we talked about was the view really speaks to that. And, it's like the third one up. So, but I appreciate your give me that nice segue. So this is the third thing. God's mission is more important than God himself. And, the question is, how is it possible to think that God's mission is more important than God? But when our need for significance is rooted more in our sense of accomplishment slash ego than in God's view of our significance, which is independent of our accomplishments, that can be the thing that turns you into believing that God's mission is more important than God himself. And, some of it is a need for significance. And especially when you've been introduced to God and you think, yeah, this is how I'm going to become significant. I'm going to do this work. And so, it is, it's kind of a cycle. And so the next question would be, is there a role for ambition when it comes to doing God's work? And I think, a lot of times we think of ambition as being, people who have a desire for power, glory, and fame. And, I like this definition: a strong desire to do or achieve something, typically requiring determination and hard work. I think most of us would think, well, that's not a bad thing. But, how, I mean, there is a downside, right? And part of it is when it becomes your way of determining your significance. Any thoughts around this? Or
I think when we're really driven on mission, we probably should ask ourselves at what cost, and not necessarily what cost to me. What's being sacrificed as a result of all my blind ambition? Is my connection to God suffering because I'm more connected to my ambition or not?
yeah, I mean, I will say that in Jethani's book, he does talk about a lot of, gives a bunch of different examples of ministers and their, great achievements and how empty they ended up feeling, primarily because they weren't so they were asking questions like, how could I have this very successful ministry but not really know God?
Yeah.
He actually alludes to Jesus's, his comment, away from me, I never knew you. For people who said, well, I did this, I did that. I was a little, I thought, well, I don't think I could go there. But, but it can happen. And, lots of ministers burn out, and lots of ministers, get lots of people in ministry, marriages suffer,
Mhm.
and he actually alludes to the fact that sometimes people get into, secret sin because they're so disconnected, and yet they're doing great things, yet they find themselves looking for ways to soothe this pain in, inappropriate ways. But it is I think a good question, because I think we do want to be ambitious people, and we any other thoughts?
I think this is a particularly good one for church leaders and ministers to do an examination. It made me think of a movie that Dale and I watched recently. I'm not sure get the title right, but it's a movie about Tammy Faye. Yeah, and it's actually very well done. But the person, like when she started as a young woman she had a sense of mission. She had a sense of God calling her. She certainly started off with a great deal of innocence and purity of heart, for sure. And you just kind of see it, their success, and just everything, just eroded away, the spiritual nature eroded, because they had these metrics. They had a sense of what we need to do next. And all this is kind of the text example of what this chapter is about.
Yeah. Yeah. And and like I said, this is something, I know I've been there a lot of this myself. So,
I wonder, Julie, because I'm an incredibly ambitious person, but I'm more motivated by gratitude. I've been presented with opportunities and gifts and an expectation to do something good with them. I don't doubt for a second that God loves me, whether I'm accomplished or not. I don't doubt. I don't think I do it to purchase God's love, but I certainly do it to say thank you for God's love.
Yeah, that's a good perspective, John. So in this third view, characterizing a life for God, is God's mission defines everything and everyone. An individual is either on the mission, an object of the mission, an obstacle to the mission, an aid to the mission, or one who should be on mission. And the question is it possible that even when our mission is to love people, our perspective can define and separate them so unlovingly? Listen, I understand this. I've felt this, in, out, individual on mission, in, object of mission, out, obstacle to the mission, out, aid to the mission, in, one who should be on the mission, out. So you're constantly navigating this, people who are in and people who are out, and, how do you, and even when your mission is to love people, and you think about it a lot of times, and I'm saying this from my own perspective. I mean, I don't think I view the world in this way now, but I have. And you start defining love around that. Well, of course I love them. They're the object of my mission, but you still have this sense of they're out. They need to be brought in. So I think this is another real downside. Do you think Jesus saw people differently? And what examples come to mind? Robert?
Can I read something?
Sure.
Yeah. I don't know. It just came to my mind. It says, "For it is by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not from yourselves. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." And there's a little commentary on it. It says, "We become Christians through God's unmerited grace, not as a result of any effort, ability, intelligence, choice, or act of service on our part. However, out of gratitude for the free gift, we will seek to help and serve others with kindness, love, and gentleness, and not merely to please ourselves. While no action or work we do can help us obtain salvation, God's intention is that our salvation will result in acts of service. We are not saved merely for our own benefit, but to serve Christ and build up the church.
Robert, you have a way of always coming up with these pretty good verses.
Yeah.
And listen, I one of the things that I know, I mean, I think Dale's talked about it too, but this idea of, kind of the reverse way of looking at Jesus's ministry, that it first included belonging was first. Then the idea of modeling behavior, and then ultimately some teaching about what to do once, but you're kind of a member first. And so that there is a way of being inclusive on mission, and you don't have to have a sense of inside outside. So I think that Jesus is definitely models that. There's not that sense of, people are so far outside. He may have been a little bit more like that with the Pharisees and religious leaders. But I think so that's a way of looking at that. Other thoughts about Jesus's model in this regard, in terms of being on mission, but not defining people so much by his mission. I mean, I think, the woman caught in adultery is probably a good example. Make sure that she knows that she's just like everyone, in terms of everyone leaves because they can't say they've not sinned.
Do you think, or maybe Jesus pragmatically really expected very little of human beings? He did all he could to show us a way, but he understood that we're human, and sort of gave us room to be ourselves and to find the way to him.
Yeah, if there's a way to not have a lot of high expectations of someone and still love them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's good. This question is probably very similar to the other one, but how can we be more inclusive, in our desires to reach out to people? Or any thoughts about this what not to do in living a life for God? I feel like I had some really good questions tonight. Nobody knows what to say.
Well, maybe
Stumpers.
Another what not to do is don't expect too much of yourself. Because we are human. We're not gods ourselves. We have all sorts of weaknesses and misgivings.
And Julie, I want to add that, we should, and we do, we should not judge people. If we judge people, then we won't include.
Well, we got about a minute left. I really wanted to make sure to finish this part of the prepositions.
That was a good 59 minutes, Julie. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone want to make a closing comment?
You gave us some great material tonight, Julie. And I think, if anything, I've been sitting here absorbing your material, and it was rich enough that I didn't have quick answers for your questions because I'm working very hard absorbing the good material you gave us.
Yeah, I second what Dale said.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think that this part about the for God really challenged me, and I don't know that. I mean, I've been there. I don't think I'm still there completely, but I could really relate to a lot of this, these what not to do's. But thank you. Okay, with that, well, I guess we can say goodnight.
Thank you, Julia.
Thank you guys for
Thank
your
you.
listening.
Job.
Thanks, Julie.
Thanks, Julie.
Thanks,
Take
Julie.
care.
That was awesome.
Oh, you guys are so nice.
Thank you, Julie.
All right, thanks
See you
everyone.
later.
Thanks, Julie.
Have a
Bye-bye.
good night.